In China, Shanghai says its coronavirus restrictions will continue to be enforced, even though the lockdowns were scheduled to end tomorrow. This comes as the New York Times reports that hospitals in Shanghai are isolating young children in a different location from their parents. One woman who was separated from her 2-year-old daughter for several days with no direct contact called the situation totally inhumane. And joining us now is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, always great to see you. Thanks so much. First off, I want to get your reaction to these reports of young children being separated from their parents in Shanghai.
Yeah, this is inhuman. And it's also not only 2-year-old children, it's also children who are breastfeeding. This is totalitarianism. This is China's communist regime. So we shouldn't be surprised. They do this in a number of contexts, and certainly with COVID-19, these protection measures really don't make sense anymore. They're more about the control of people. And the Chinese people are across the country are now starting to demonstrate, as they are in Shanghai. They just will not put up with this.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how traumatic it must be for those children. Also, you know, the city announced it's extending its timeline for COVID restrictions on its 26 million residents. What more do you know about the situation there? And also more on your thoughts when it comes to this mitigation strategy.
There was supposed to be a 2-phase lockdown, one for the eastern part of Shanghai and then for the western part, 5 days apiece. But there are some people in that city who have now been locked down for about 17 or 18 days, and the whole city resembles a ghost town because it no longer is a 2-phase operation. The Communist Party has made the number of infections and deaths in China a test of regime legitimacy. Because if you go back to early 2020, they were criticizing the U.S., saying that our infections and deaths showed the failures of democracy and that communism was superior. Now the regime is deathly afraid because each case represents a mortal threat to the regime.
Yeah, and Gordon, as you know, I mean, Shanghai is the busiest shipping port in the world. The city also produces things like semi-conductors, electronics, and cars. That said, you know, what do you think the economic ramifications of this extended lockdown will be for China and also the world?
Well, certainly it is going to cause logistic backlogs. Communist Party propaganda says that the port is operating normally. That is belied by a number of other reports talking about problems in logistics in and around Shanghai. Also, it's not just the port; it's the truckers and the river traffic leading up to the port area. So I think that this is going to knock a couple percentage points off of China's GDP. Because remember, it's not just Shanghai, Tracy. It's Shenzhen, it's Jilin province, and it's across the country. So right now, Beijing has no defenses against disease except for isolation. And isolation undermines economic growth, of course.
Yeah, and Gordon, on a different note, in Hong Kong, Carrie Lam has announced that she will not be seeking a second term as leader of that city, citing family reasons. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and what the future leadership of Hong Kong may look like.
Well, there will be the election committee, which is Beijing dominated, will pick her successor. But this is perhaps the toughest job in the world to succeed because you've got two constituencies. You've got hardliners in Beijing and you got the people in Hong Kong. Now, Beijing sets the tone, which means that your chief executive of the city is always going to be deeply unpopular. And all of her predecessors have been deeply unpopular. So I'm no surprise that she's not getting a second term. This is a job that is just impossible.
Yeah. We have probably about 30 seconds or so left, but curious, what are you following right now? What are you looking at?
I'm actually looking at China's support for Russia. I mean, especially after Bucha, I don't think that Beijing is going to pivot. They're going to support Putin because Putin is bleeding the United States and the West, and that's good enough for Xi Jinping. So we're seeing an atrocity-committing regime in Moscow being supported by another atrocity-committing regime in Beijing.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Gordon, thanks so much. Always great to have you on.
Thanks, Tracy.